At the beginning of the film, our main character witnesses his sister performing an experiment on a magical sword. But it fails, and she suffers the consequence of gradually transforming into a different creature. He doesn't know how to save his sister because his teacher has also fallen unconscious after the failed experiment. His sister gradually turns into a dragon and flies away. Nearby sorcerers see the dragon and use magic to attack, but the main character blocks all their attacks to let his sister escape. This continent has existed for thousands of years. Dwarves once lived here, but were hunted by dragons to the point of having to hide at the edge of the continent. Then sorcerers were born, and humans also appeared on this continent. 5 years after the opening events of the film, our main character has taken the name Orphan and is chasing 2 kids who borrowed money from him but haven't paid it back. He has to use magic to catch them and demand they repay him, but they complain they don't have the money, so he gives them a beating. A girl who is a royal police officer happens to be chasing these 2 kids because they're wanted. She throws 2 darts but hits a passerby, causing Orphan to speak up. The 2 kids take the opportunity to escape, and the girl has to ask Orphan to heal the person she accidentally hit with the sleep-inducing darts. The girl knows he's an expelled sorcerer, which makes him recall the events of that day. Orphan then goes to his usual restaurant to eat. The owner's son, Magic, is excited because Orphan is a sorcerer. The owner knows that many people out there claim to be sorcerers to deceive others, but Orphan is genuine because his dragon-shaped necklace is given by the Tower of Fangs to sorcerers. Magic's mother was also a sorcerer, so Orphan thinks he might be able to use magic too. Magic wants Orphan to teach him, but Orphan demands tuition fees. The owner wants Orphan not to take advantage of being a regular customer to lure his son. But Orphan believes Magic can still become a sorcerer due to his passion and sorcerer bloodline. Suddenly, the 2 kids return and want to make a deal with Orphan to have conditions to repay him. He then has to wear an elegant outfit and go with them to do something. Orphan notices that people seem to be out on the streets less, and the bespectacled kid informs him that there have been some shady things happening recently, so people rarely go out. Meanwhile, the sorcerers are still hunting the dragon that Orphan's sister transformed into. She sees her old teacher among them and decides to turn away without attacking. Orphan is now led by the 2 kids to a nobleman's house for a scam. Both the mother and daughter of this family, upon hearing that Orphan is a nobleman dealing in sleeping medicine, asked to step outside. Orphan, who didn't understand the plan from the beginning, is dragged here and has a bunch of nonsense made up about him, so he starts to struggle. Suddenly, the second daughter of this family enters and reveals that she has heard everything and knows all 3 are scammers. The 2 kids pretend to be brainwashed by Orphan, while he proves that he's a sorcerer, making the girl remember that a sorcerer from the Tower of Fangs once came to see her father. But her father passed away 2 years ago. She vaguely remembers that the person who came to see her father was quite muscular and had black hair tied back. Orphan's teacher has now chased the dragon to this town. The girl then tells Orphan that 5 years ago, a man quite similar to the one she just described came here and gave them a sword. Suddenly, the dragon flies to the mansion where Orphan's group is staying. He runs after the daughter and reaches the warehouse where her mother and older sister are hiding. He uses magic to open the door and faces the dragon, who is also his sister. But she pays no attention to her brother and breathes fire to burn the box and take the sword away. The sorcerers have arrived and are attacking the dragon outside, forcing Orphan to rush to knock them out to help his sister. The teacher and others use magic to attack, but he once again casts spells to block those attacks as he did years ago. The dragon then breathes fire towards Orphan, but he uses a technique to block and dispel it. Going back to the past, in the north of the continent is the Tower of Fangs, where sorcerers gather to live and train together. The strongest people here are Childman and his disciples, and Orphan was formerly one of his 5 students. He teaches his students daily and lets them use their best spells to attack him, but he easily counters all their techniques. Orphan's sister is Azali, who is known as the Chaos Sorcerer. She has a habit of causing trouble for her friends and is also Childman's best student. Her techniques cause the surroundings to shake, but Childman's magic can still block her attacks. Orphan wants her to restrain herself a bit, but she prefers to be this serious. As a result, she has been given her 50th self-criticism assignment by the teacher. Orphan was then asked by Azali to write the self-criticism for her. She doesn't like writing, so he wants her to cause less trouble to avoid having to write. Friends also advise Azali to limit her disruptive behavior, because Childman's class has been complained about by other classes, and if there's more trouble, they will have to disband. A young man in the class who often makes ridiculous inventions has brought a robot he just made. So Orphan has stood up to be the destroyer of nonsensical inventions. His class at that time was very fun, although they frequently caused trouble for others and often teased each other. Back to the present, Orphan is in jail with 2 kids, or more accurately, 2 dwarves. He could easily escape but doesn't want to become a wanted criminal, so he hasn't left yet. He and that dragon are both sorcerers from the Tower of Fang. Most people there are orphans, and he has been looking for a way to turn Azali back into a human for a long time. He was about to give up when Azali appeared once again, making him determined to find the spell Azali used to reverse it. A former friend named Hart came to call Orphan to meet the teacher. He put on his old clothes, and Hart was surprised to find him wandering here. He is also a secretary in this town and admits that Orphan has changed a lot compared to before. When meeting the teacher, he realized it had been 5 years. 5 years ago, when his teacher was still unconscious, all the sorcerers decided to hold a funeral. Orphan was angry because he believed they were denying that Azali was still alive and decided to reject her by holding this funeral. He destroyed that empty coffin and claimed that Azali was the strongest sorcerer the Tower of Fang ever had, so he would find her at all costs. If they wanted to bury someone, they should bury him. He would discard his old name and choose the name Orphan to go find Azali. Hart wanted to stop him because he was the best in the class, but he was only at the top because Azali never took tests. The teacher revealed that he and Azali had experimented to activate the Holy Sword, but the sword lost control and turned Azali into a dragon. When asked why the sword was here, he said that before losing consciousness, he had entrusted the sword to a student for safekeeping. That person had brought the sword here to ask this noble family to keep it safe. It seems the instinct to return to human form in the dragon had brought it here to take the sword away. Childman revealed that to capture Azali, a master of both black and white magic, they needed a black sorcerer specializing in combat like Orphan. He refused to help them kill Azali. The teacher didn't force him, but said he was the best person he could rely on. Hart also thought that he could restore his reputation and return to the Tower of Fang if he helped them, but he was still not very willing. Childman revealed that he had placed a tracker on the sword before the dragon took it away, so if he didn't go with him now, he would never see Azali again. He would leave tonight, so Orphan could come if he wanted. Orphan then returned to the inn to pack his things. He promised Magic he would return soon to pay the rent. He then went to the noble's house to repair their warehouse. The daughter paid him with this magic ring. He recognized this ring as Azali's from before. It had magic engraved on it that could block a single attack. He knew this ring had been sent here with the sword and decided to set out to find Azali. He would save her and help her escape before the other sorcerers could kill her. He then set out and joined up with the other sorcerers. When meeting, he also encountered Comic, the young man with bizarre inventions from the past. He had changed quite a bit, and Orphan knew that on this journey, he couldn't let old emotions interfere. He had to save Azali at all costs. On the way, Orphan noticed that Childman had brought a white sorcerer to seal Azali. He knew that he had anticipated casualties on this trip and thought he was willing to let the whole group die in exchange for at least one person killing Azali. Meanwhile, the noble's daughter and the 2 dwarves were following behind. The 2 dwarves wanted to capture Azali to sell her for money, while the daughter just wanted to help Orphan. Suddenly, all three were discovered by a bear and screamed. At this time, Orphan and the group had stopped to rest for a while. He saw that this group was full of strong people, with Childman certainly being the strongest. He didn't know if he could defeat them all to save Azali, so he decided to leave first. He sensed Azali's presence and ran off, shouting her name. He felt her presence more clearly and continued running and calling out to Azali. Suddenly, a wave of fire swept through and burned down a portion of the forest. He thought Azali had cleared the path for him, but then the dragon suddenly breathed fire towards him. Orphan tried to dodge and advance, but it was almost hopeless as his power was no match for Azali's. He could only raise a shield to block the attack when at that moment, Childman and the other sorcerers arrived. Comic came to heal him, while the white sorcerer who came along rushed out to try and seal Azali. But before he could finish, he was incinerated by the fire breath. They had to split up and cast spells at Azali. Orphan noticed the sword and decided to quickly rush to grab it. He took the sword and ran, with Azali chasing after him. Childman had Heart chase after Orphan, and then Comic became the next to be incinerated. Heart caught up and informed Orphan about Comic's death, saying that if he had just helped them, Comic wouldn't have died, and that what he was trying to do was futile because only Azali knew how to use the sword. Orphan was determined not to return, so there was no choice but to fight Heart. He enveloped Orphan in darkness and rushed to attack, but Orphan used magic to counter it. At that moment, the other three ran up and accidentally hit Heart on the head. He had helped them deal with the bear and decided to help Heart because this might be what he felt was right. He then returned to find that the dragon had dealt with everyone except Childman. He went to support him, and they fought back together. When Childman had an opening, he was about to launch an attack to take down the dragon, but Orphan blocked the attack. So he approached and stabbed Orphan once before launching his own chaos spell to completely destroy the dragon. He then healed Orphan and let him go to the dragon's corpse on his own while he and Heart returned with the sword. Orphan seemed to hear the dragon's last words and realized something. The next morning, he waited on the road that Childman would pass through. He called Childman out to meet. He knew who he really was. He had realized that the soul inside that body was actually Azali, not Childman. Knowing her cover was blown, Azali revealed herself. She knew Orphan was the only one who could see her true self, and she had hoped that one day he would become her ally. She admitted that she had failed in her experiment years ago, lost consciousness, and transformed into a dragon and flew away. 5 years later, when Childman woke up and chased after her, she recognized him and switched consciousness with Childman. She didn't know where the sword was, so she let him find it for her. This sword could transform anyone cut by it into any shape, so she wanted to return to her original form and be with Orphan. But he felt that she had betrayed his trust, so he would oppose her because she had killed Childman. He had entrusted that task to Orphan before he died. They then engaged in battle, with Azali thinking she had struck Orphan, only to miss and be counterattacked. He revealed that he had swallowed the ring, and it had indeed protected him after one hit. He would take the sword away, and she could keep Childman's body, but he was sure that body wouldn't last much longer. Him were about to take the sword, but him had let Azali know that Childman had sacrificed himself for her. He had chased after her to help her return to normal, and the reason he didn't resist when she swapped their consciousnesses was because he wanted to save her. Azali was determined to become someone worthy of Childman, so him left the sword behind. The film takes us back to the past, when Orphan was still living in the Tower of Fang. He and his friends had mischievous days there. He often went around with a dolly, who was always causing trouble, and their friend Tish, who was part of the disciplinary committee and frequently had to resolve issues. Since Childman was rarely at school then, Tish always had to manage this troublemaking group. She threatened Azali that if he kept causing trouble, he'd be punished with 100 strikes. Orphan back then wasn't much of a troublemaker, but because he hung out with a dolly, he often got warnings from Tish. Hart then ran up to report that he had just found a few girls, But Tish threatened to forbid him from approaching any girls anymore, because he would chat up anyone he met and then follow them around. Just then, Comic arrived. He got punched by Tish for running in the hallway. The thing was, Comic was having trouble with his invention. Comic led his two friends to the courtyard, where his invention was causing problems for everyone as it could reflect magic attacks. Hart stepped forward to use wind magic, but it was reflected back and blew him away. Orphan had to step up and use light magic to lock its arms, and Tish from above added another shot to finish it off. The next morning, Azali came to call Orphan for a trip. When they got on the horse carriage to leave, he still didn't know where they were going. After looking around for a while, he realized Azali was taking him home for a visit. They both then returned to their old town, where they had been sent to the orphanage. They went back to their old orphanage. Azali remembered the day Orphan was sent there. At that time, she and Tish were still friends there and were very excited when Orphan arrived. He and these two older girls had many memories together there, until one day both girls were taken to the Tower of Fang, and he didn't see them again until he was also brought there. They then visited the graves of people they knew, and suddenly when Orphan turned around, Azali was gone. She had gone into a nearby ruined house, and just as Orphan was passing by, he called out to Azali many times but got no response. Suddenly someone called his name and told him to go to the orphanage to save his sister. When he returned, he found it quiet, so he knew he had to be cautious as he entered. As soon as he went in, he was suddenly tripped and lost his knife. A creature lunged at him, but he destroyed it with magic. As he went further in, a bucket fell on his head. When he went up the stairs, another cloth fell on his head, startling him. When he entered a room, he saw an image of Azali being harmed and a ghost appeared to attack him. He was angry and couldn't see the attack because the ghost was almost standing still. He was very worried about Azali, but now he only had one option, and he knew the whole house wouldn't survive his next move. He then used a spell called Heart Mirror that caused the whole house to collapse. Azali nearby was also surprised because she had lost to Orphan. That night, she brought things to Orphan. He was surprised that she was unharmed, and she even called him to return as if nothing had happened. He immediately knew that Azali had played a trick on him because the bucket and cloth had been used by Azali to trick him before. She pretended not to know anything, but he was very angry with Adali. He knew Azali had gone too far with her joke, and was sure that the incident with Comic's robot going berserk was also Adali's doing. She returned the knife to Orphan, confirming his suspicion that it was indeed Azali who set up the trick. Azali thanked Orphan for worrying about her. They both then left, and Azali said that if this really happens in the future, he should remember to find her at all costs. Back to the present, Orphan still remembered when he spared Adali's life. She was determined to go find herself again. As for Orphan, he now knew there were two people behind his horse carriage. He told them both to show themselves and guessed it was the young lady and Magic. He had known they both snuck on since the time she gave him this horse carriage. Orphan asked why they were following him. The young lady wanted to see the world and had left a letter for her mother. Magic wanted to learn magic from Orphan and would pay him tuition fees. Magic had discussed this with his father, so Orphan shouldn't worry. Magic also knew this young lady because they both studied at the same school. Magic asked Orphan where he was planning to go, and he said he would return to the Tower of Fang as he had business there. On the way, the three of them reached the Fenrir Forest. This forest has many dangerous creatures, and to get to the Tower of Fang, they had to go through here. When Claire went to bathe, she asked Magic to keep watch, but he used magic to peek at her. She kept feeling like someone was watching her, but Magic said she was imagining things. Orphan had to come and teach Magic a lesson for using magic for such useless tricks. When he left, Claire asked what was happening on the other side. Magic turned around saying it was nothing, but accidentally saw her and got hit in the head with a rock. As they continued their journey, Orphan couldn't believe that it took him 3 years to use magic, while Magic only needed 2 weeks since he started teaching him. Maybe the name says it all. At this rate, Magic would become a sorcerer in just 1 year. Claire noticed that Magic was now dressing like Orphan. Well, these were Orphan's clothes after all, and Claire was also wearing his pants. He knew very well that she had altered them to fit her size. Now, to reach the Tower of Fang, they needed to cross this forest, and it would take another 3 weeks of travel. After a while, Orphan changed direction to go around because he wanted to avoid that observation post. If they were discovered to be sorcerers, they would be reported to the church. The church is a religious organization with influence equal to the royal family, and they extremely hate sorcerers. That night, when they stopped in the forest, Orphan saw that the food he had prepared for the trip was almost gone because of the 2 freeloaders. Claire claimed she could cook, but when she did, no one could eat it. Magic wanted them to stop arguing, so he went into the forest to find food. Magic got lost and was attacked by a snake. He used a magic shield to block the snake when a girl discovered him. After learning that Magic was a sorcerer and had a master nearby, she advised him and his master to leave. She was being controlled by this forest and couldn't leave. She thought this place was very dangerous, and they should leave as soon as possible. Her name was Fienna, and she lived in a village that outsiders could never find. When he asked for some food from her village, they had already come because Magic's group had trespassed into the forest illegally. Fienna tried to protect Magic, but they had also sent people to Orphan's side. Fienna was a nun of the temple, so if she didn't obey them, she would also be punished. Orphan on the other side was fighting against the villagers and had to protect Claire, while Magic was being protected by Fienna. But he cleverly recited a spell so they wouldn't notice and made the snake fall to create a distraction to run away. But these villagers had guns, and Magic, not anticipating this, got shot. Orphan on the other side had used magic to defeat the villagers and knew Magic had been captured, so he went to rescue him. The 2 dwarves were also captured in the village. They were the ones who had tipped off the villagers to attack Orphan's group. They were currently being forced to work there and would soon find a way to escape. As for Orphan, he soon found the village and noticed that Magic seemed to be imprisoned in that tower. He recognized the village flag as following the dragon faith. In this world, there are 2 faiths, the faith of the gods and the dragon faith. The dragon faith is the enemy of sorcerers. Claire didn't understand why the symbol of sorcerers was a dragon, yet they were hated by the dragon faith, so he had to explain. In ancient times, the 6 strongest dragon races lived together and stole magic from the gods. The leader of the 6 races was the Angel Dragon tribe. They created humans and the sorcerers of today. Sorcerers can be seen as half human, half dragon. Although the angels of the past created humans, they believed that sorcerers were individuals who had stolen power from themselves, so they organized sorcerer hunting events. When the angels disappeared, the hunt also ended, and only a few old-fashioned people still held the angels' ideology, so they established the dragon faith to oppose sorcerers. Suddenly, a power surge appeared right in the middle of the village, and Orphan discovered that the thing that appeared was the master of this forest, Fenrir. The villagers called it the master and came to worship. Orphan knew he had to overcome the wolf to reach the tower. He asked Claire to go to the observation post and report what was happening here. He was then discovered by the village chief and had a gun pointed at him. Orphan quickly ran away and was soon surrounded by villagers. He was forced to use magic to fight back, but got stabbed in the hand. The wolf had also approached behind him. It asked if he was ready to make a trade to gain the power to protect what belonged to him. He then became dizzy and fainted. After that, Fienna informed the villagers about what the wolf had told her, but she only said what they wanted to hear and concealed the truth. She then said a few things to Orphan, telling him not to oppose the village chief. He later woke up in jail and didn't say anything when questioned. Another person, Solu, came and revealed that Orphan was a black sorcerer from the Fang Tower, but the chief believed that even a black sorcerer would be no match for his gun. He planned to start interrogating Orphan tomorrow. Solu then saw Fienna bringing food to Magic. He knew she had misreported the wolf's words earlier, but he knew she was still doing what was best for the villagers. Magic had regained consciousness by this time. He couldn't believe he had been shot and still survived. The reason he was alive was because she had used healing magic in time before it was too late. Fienna had been living alone in this house without parents, and her only job was to calm the villagers, appearing at the right time and saying the right things. Saving magic was something she did of her own volition. At this moment, the village chief arrived. He wanted Fienna to pack up and prepare to leave with the whole village. He claimed that he had taken her in when she was lost in the forest, but she was actually the one who had found him, so he believed the forest had given her to him. Magic was indignant and said she didn't belong to him. When the chief pulled out his gun, she locked his hand. He reluctantly complied with her wishes, put the gun away, and told her to pack up soon. Magic still insisted on taking Fienna with them, so he remembered that he needed to find Orphan and Claire. But Fienna had already taken Magic to see Orphan in jail. He had been mentally attacked by Fenrir and couldn't move now. This was because he had been trained to deal with such attacks before. Ordinary people would have had their minds shattered by now. Magic thought Orphan was caught because he wasn't good enough, while he had found a way to save Fienna. Orphan knew full well that Magic was trying to act tough in front of a girl. He also thanked Fienna for healing his mind earlier. Fienna then returned to the tower, while Orphan was very angry because the two dwarves had revealed information about his group to this village, leading to their current situation. He was about to deal with both of them when Magic stopped him. At this moment, Solu came down. He drew his knife and rushed towards Orphan. When Magic tried to intervene, he was thrown aside. Solu then engaged in combat with Orphan and realized that Orphan was only pretending to be unable to move. After a while of fighting, he suddenly learned Orphan's former name. Meanwhile, Claire had brought the forest rangers here, but they didn't dare to enter because the church had instructed them to stay away from this place. So Claire had to go in alone. The reason Solu knew about Orphan was because 5 years ago, Orphan had been promised to be the successor of Childman with his talent. Solu then drew his sword. Orphan realized he was a death master, an assassin of the church faction, specially assigned to deal with those who opposed the church. Neither knew why the other was in this desolate place. Before anyone could answer, Claire knocked Solu unconscious to save time. She had brought the forest rangers, so Orphan asked her to tell them to clear the way for him to leave. She refused, knowing he would leave her again, but Fienna had come down and controlled Claire to follow Orphan's words. She then asked Orphan to take the unconscious people away, while she would stay and go with the villagers. She had known Solu was a death master because she had looked into his mind. She wanted Orphan to save Solu because he was the only one who treated her well in this village. Solu had come here to assassinate the village chief, who was formerly a church member but had fled here. She had originally been brought here to soothe Fenrir, but the village chief had gained the trust of the entire village, and they had been actively making guns to fight against sorcerers, even though the royal family had banned the use of guns. She knew the village chief was using her to find the heart of the forest, and once he found it, he would dispose of her. So she wanted to save the most precious people to her before something bad happened. She wasn't afraid of death if it was her destiny, as she had made friends. Orphan was tired of this answer and refused her request, saying that if she couldn't even escape from his hands now, she shouldn't try to act tough. Solu then regained consciousness, and Orphan said he wanted to make a deal with him. He would return the sword as long as Solu led him to the village chief. Meanwhile, Magic was staying with Fienna to protect her. Orphan had gone with Solu to the village chief's house. He wanted to know what the chief was plotting with the heart of the forest. He planned to negotiate and give the chief the name of the person who wanted to kill him. Solu knew he was betraying him, so he rushed forward but was blown away by Orphan. The village chief pulled out a gun to shoot, but Orphan dodged and fired a spell at the gun. The chief needed power to overcome the dragon clan. Just as he pulled the trigger, the gun exploded. He died but managed to tell Orphan that the church was hiding something terrible that could destroy the entire continent. Solu, feeling his job was done, set off to return. Meanwhile, Claire couldn't persuade the forest rangers. She wanted to wait for her friends here. Suddenly, a small dog ran out to Claire. The rangers had chased and beaten it, but it jumped onto her. They informed her it was Fenrir's offspring. Knowing Fenrir was nearby, they fled first. The villagers had discovered the village chief's death and wanted Fienna to lead them. But Orphan thought they should make their own decisions. They didn't listen to him and decided to chase Orphan to force him to guide them to the heart of the forest. Fienna and Magic ran out and saw him being chased, so they had to go help. Fenrir had given Fienna some time to leave before it dealt with the entire village. She had separated from Magic. Orphan was currently hiding. He peeked out and was spotted by someone, so he knocked this person out and took their gun. He then met up with Magic and went with him. They were soon driven onto a rooftop and surrounded. Solu had come to pick up Fienna, but she didn't want to leave because she still had things to do. Orphan revealed that he could use teleportation magic. It was quite risky, but could only teleport 10 meters, so they both tried it and managed to teleport to the neighboring rooftop. They temporarily escaped and met Claire when suddenly Fenrir appeared. It started destroying the village, forcing Orphan's group to run to stop it. He threatened it with its offspring, but it didn't care and told him to do whatever he wanted, as it could use resurrection magic. It had originally given the village a chance when it sent Fienna there. She was a corpse that it had resurrected and sent to oversee the village. It was very angry about the village chief's plot to touch the heart of the forest. Now that the chief was dead, the whole village was plotting the same thing, so it had to punish them severely. Orphan wouldn't let it do that and would stop it at all costs. He then pulled out his gun and fired a few shots, but they had no effect. The wolf attacked him with mind magic, but he managed to use a spell to break it. He knew the wolf's ability was to attack through eye contact, so he just needed to limit its vision to break the spell. He then told Magic to use light refraction magic like he had used to peek at Claire. Magic created a refraction zone around the wolf, enough for Orphan to throw the gun in and use magic to make it explode. The wolf was down, but it decided to let Orphan and his group go. It had met Childman before and decided to keep its promise to him about sparing Orphan this time. It was still obsessed with dealing with the village when Fienna arrived. She also had some of its power and decided to sacrifice herself to protect the village. The wolf knew it could no longer control Fienna, so it would deal with her too. But Claire stood up and held up the wolf cub. It had expelled Fenrir back to the forest. Fenrir had warned them about disturbing the forest, and that their freedom would not be eternal. The next morning, the two dwarves had come out of hiding. They thought Orphan had been incinerated by Fenrir, but he had come to remind them about paying their debt. Fienna had left with the villagers for another place. She had thanked Magic and Orphan for helping her escape from being Fenrir's subordinate. She hoped Magic would become a great sorcerer. Orphan's group then set off, and Magic still felt worried about Fienna, but he still wanted to become a sorcerer more. Claire then ran out, and she had brought the wolf cub along. Orphan saw that they already had another mouth to feed. On the way, Orphan dreamed about what the principal had said about his destiny, that he would surpass his teacher, Childman. He woke up and doubted the words he had just remembered. Not long after, all three officially saw the Fang Tower. Magic believed it was where he would become a true sorcerer. At the school at this time, people began to hear news that the fifth elder had been assassinated. If this continues, all the elders will soon be killed. The administration wants to quickly resolve this major case as it affects the safety of Fang Tower, even if they have to use force to solve it. Childman's last student, Fort, now realizes that everything started happening since Childman set out to find Azali. Tish was waiting in Fort's room and asked if Azali had really been defeated, but Fort wanted to solve the elder assassination case first. The killer was described as having black hair and being quite thin, seemingly a sorcerer from the tower. Fort had heard Hart's account of meeting Orphan on the other side of the battle line, and since Childman had also disappeared, Fort suspected Orphan was the killer, and that his actions against the elders were for revenge. Meanwhile, Orphan was bathing his horse when he saw Magic being bullied by Claire again because he criticized her cooking. She had now become proficient in using the wolf cub to attack. Orphan later got into trouble with the forest rangers. Although they knew he was a sorcerer, they didn't want to hand him over to the church because they knew he would be beaten to death. So it was best for him to leave, and they would pretend they hadn't seen him. As he was leaving, he remembered he forgot his dragon-shaped necklace. When he went back in, the forest ranger had been assassinated, and on the wall was his necklace along with a message asking who the heir was. The other two didn't know what he was pondering. Suddenly, the carriage was unexpectedly shot and exploded. Magic and Claire discovered someone in the sky. Magic shot a spell at him, but it was shot back stronger. But the wolf cub blocked the attack for both of them. Orphan was unharmed after the previous attack and returned. He called the other guy a brat, so he used teleportation magic and appeared right in front of him and shot a crystal spell. Magic and Orphan were scratched while Claire was still protected by the wolf cub. Orphan knew this guy was stronger than him, but not yet as strong as the wolf cub. So he told Claire to be careful and hold onto the wolf cub tightly. He didn't know how the guy could use Childman's teleportation magic. Then the guy suggested that perhaps he wasn't really the heir people rumored about. He realized the guy was the one who killed the forest ranger. He rushed in to fight, but the guy completely outmaneuvered him. Claire had the wolf cub attack, but he took the hit directly and turned to attack Claire. However, he missed because a dagger was thrown into his hand. That dagger was from Tish. She said she would take Orphan away, so the other guy revealed his face completely. He was surprised to see it was Orphan's face from 5 years ago. Tish then took Orphan's group back to Fang Tower, and on the way, he introduced Tish to his two siblings and introduced his two siblings to Tish. She was also surprised that he had changed quite a bit after 5 years. When they arrived at the gate, Tish showed the guards her identity to protect Orphan's group to enter. He wondered about the tight security and learned that there had been many assassinations recently. In this city, most of the sorcerers in the tower are people who will have high positions and power. The houses given to sorcerers are like mansions, as evident from Childman's house. Meanwhile, the elders all suspected the church was involved in this case. While Orphan knew that Childman's and Fort's information networks should have already detected the assassin by now, Fort was very certain that person was him. Fort had now called Hart. He only saw a blood-stained sword in the old town and suspected that Childman had been killed, and the two who could do it were Asali and Orphan. They all believed Asali was the dragon that had been defeated before, so Orphan would naturally be the suspect. Tish had now brought Orphan's group to her private home. Most sorcerers don't have families because no one wants to send their children to a school with a high student mortality rate like Fang Tower. When they went inside, Orphan met his old cat, but it had completely forgotten him. He saw that Tish still collected strange things. She had prepared rooms for all three. Magic and Claire took the opportunity to look at Orphan's childhood photo album. He revealed that he, Tish, and Asali were the closest family, and coincidentally were thrown into the tower and studied in the same class. Tish later went out to go to the tower to report that Orphan was not the killer, but he had no intention of returning to the tower, which angered Tish because he and Fort were both equally stubborn. That evening, Orphan knew he had to tell Tish about Asali and Childman. He knew Tish would be angry when she heard the story. Suddenly, his voice rang out, and he had gone to the fountain to meet the other version of himself, the one with his face from 5 years ago. That person considered himself the assassin of this place, the ghost of Orphan's past, the one bearing the old name Krylancilo. Tish had now informed Fort of the truth that the culprit was someone who looked like Orphan from 5 years ago, and this person's power could be considered equal to the rumored heir. Back to Orphan, Krylan claimed that he was the embodiment that learned everything from Childman, from magic to his assassination skills. Assassination skills were the only thing Orphan didn't inherit from Childman, so he could be seen as the heir that Orphan should have become, the version that he chose to discard when he took the name Orphan. Krylin revealed he served them, and he believed Orphan knew who they were. After finishing, he left. Claire had witnessed the whole event. The next morning, Tish hadn't returned, Orphan didn't want to eat, and who was this Krylin really? Claire decided to find someone to help Orphan. 5 years ago, when Orphan left to find clues about Azali, he reluctantly became a moneylender to make a living. Now he suspected that Azali, whom he had spared, was the one who created and sent Krylin here to kill the elders. He later met Tish again. She introduced him to her 2 students. Just as Orphan introduced himself, the 2 kids recognized that last night 2 short people came asking for food, claiming to be his acquaintances. They weren't sure, so they locked the 2 short people in the storehouse. Orphan knew who they were, so he went to the storehouse to find them. He met both and thought they were trying to freeload, but he would let it go if they helped him with something. Tish, looking at the birthday gift her 2 students gave her, remembered that years ago, a mysterious person had given her a medallion with an angel image just like this. At that time, Orphan's group had made a rule that to celebrate birthdays with outsiders, they had to go through friends, but Tish didn't even know who the sender was. She often practiced with her 3 younger siblings, Orphan, Heart, and Comican. She commented that Heart, though very strong, always lost to Orphan, while Comican only excelled in recovery magic, but was weak otherwise. Fort, on the other hand, had an information network second only to Childman and magic skills only inferior to him and Azali. His knowledge was boundless, but his physical strength was limited. Orphan was often called by Childman for private training, making Tish wonder how someone as naive as Orphan could be Childman's heir. While pondering in the library, Fort came to see her. He had long had feelings for Tish. Although she had refused him, Fort's feelings remained unchanged. Tish still thought Orphan was being pampered too much by Azali, so he couldn't bring out his potential. But Fort reminded her that Orphan was still limiting his abilities to train with her because he didn't want to hurt her. So she had to call Orphan out for a serious fight. He didn't understand what was happening when she attacked him first. She had realized he was intentionally holding back during training, so she said directly that she wanted to see his true abilities. So he deflected Tish's attack in an instant and countered with a blow that sent her flying. Now she realized that when he was serious, he truly lived up to the title of heir. Back to the present, Orphan had come to see Tish to ask about a few things. He saw the mysterious gift from years ago and recognized the handwriting on the message as Comican's. Meanwhile, Claire and the 2 short people were now tasked with investigating the assassin for Orphan. Tish informed that the entire tower had almost completely stopped functioning now, as Comican had died in battle. Hart was working as a secretary in another town, Azali had vanished, and Master Childman had been missing for 2 months now. Orphan knew what had happened but didn't want to say. Tish also revealed that the situation was escalating as Fort had been poisoned in his tea. He had realized it, but didn't make it public because he wanted to control the entire tower as Childman once did. Meanwhile, as Claire and the 2 short people were eating, a group of people in black approached. Krylin revealed himself and anesthetized Claire and the wolf cub to take them away. Orphan knew he had to tell Tish the truth, so he informed her that the only person who could infiltrate Fort's network was either himself or Childman. He couldn't be the assassin because he was too pathetic to kill someone, and Childman wouldn't be able to return. The 2 dwarves later reported to Orphan that Claire had been captured and taken to Childman's mansion. He knew Krylin was trying to lure him out. Magic wanted to go with him, but Tish refused. The 2 argued, so Orphan told both of them to be quiet and said he would go alone. Magic still followed and asked if Krylin would take Claire's life. He knew Krylin wouldn't do that if he really wanted to lure him out. He decided to go alone to rescue Claire and end all the matters of the past. He then left alone. Magic wanted to follow, but Tish's student informed Magic that years ago, The tower wanted to train exceptional people for the court, so they invited Childman to be a teacher. He chose the most talented children, and from then on, people began to value Childman's children. Orphan was the most talented and received all of Childman's techniques and magic, but his weakness was that he couldn't kill people. When he left, the tower feared someone would follow Orphan and persuade him to return to the court, so they sent people after him. They suspected Orphan had defeated the follower and left them to die. Although not knowing the details, Magic believed Orphan wasn't the person they thought he was, so he still wanted to help him. Tish also followed. Orphan had now arrived at Childman's mansion. Childman had taught him that everyone has a weakness to be exploited. Orphan was considered to have only one weakness, not daring to kill people, and this assassin version of him had overcome that weakness. So now he would have to face a powerful enemy without weaknesses. But he would try to prove to Childman that even an enemy without weaknesses can be defeated. He then flew up and entered through the roof, where Krylan was already waiting for him. They both continuously cast spells and destroyed Childman's house. Orphan knew Krylan was created by Azali, and she wanted this Krylan to be defeated by Orphan. Only then could he overcome his only weakness. But now Krylan had his own consciousness. He wanted to defeat Orphan and become the only one by Azali's side. They then took out knives to fight, but when they got close, they still used magic. They continued using knives, and Orphan cut Krylan's arm. He revealed that he had thought of 3 ways to defeat him. The previous method was 1, but he knew it wouldn't work again. The second way was that he had shot out the blade and then rushed in to step on his foot to make him fall. But Krylan had used magic to counterattack, causing Orphan to be unable to dodge in time. Tish and Magic had also arrived by now and told the police to handle it. Orphan woke up in Childman's basement. Krylan had come down to find him and revealed that Childman had passed on to Azali something called the Sorcerer Killing Machine. It was a puppet, and when characters were carved on it, it would activate. Azali had always been observing him and then activated it and controlled it remotely. Krylan then took out the Holy Sword. Azali herself had slashed the puppet with this sword and transformed it into a shape similar to Orphan. He then discovered that Claire was also behind, paralyzed by a spell. Krylan knew he wouldn't leave Claire and run away. So Orphan had to use the third method. He rushed to attack, controlling the sword and casting a direct spell at Krylan. This was the move that Childman often used to torment him, and he didn't hesitate to break the neck of this puppet, because the way he thought of was to fight with a mindset ready to kill. When he discovered that Krylan was bleeding but showed no unusual signs, he began to suspect that he wasn't human. Tish and Magic were gradually approaching, not knowing where Orphan was. Krylan was still not dead. He was still determined to take Orphan's life to become the only Krylan that Azali needed. They then cast their strongest spells at each other. Both sides continuously cast spells to push back the opponent, but in the end, Orphan was the victor. Tish knew the battle was over, so she also moved faster. Magic took the opportunity to pick up another book to bring along. Orphan had now defeated the puppet and met Azali again. She revealed that she hadn't killed the elders, but the puppet had developed its own personality. She had retrieved the puppet and told Orphan that she still had work to do. She noticed Orphan looking at her with a frightening gaze, but he remarked that wasn't she very good at killing those who stood in her way, yet she was afraid of his gaze. However, he was the only one she couldn't kill. The story of him leaving someone to die was true. She believed he was the only one Childman had fully trained to counter white magic through mental training, and the reason he did so was for Orphan to be able to control her, the only one proficient in white magic in the class. But Orphan didn't think Childman had such thoughts. He had long wanted her to live peacefully somewhere. He advised her to return to the light, to the home Tish had prepared for them. She still wanted Orphan to follow her because he was the only one she could understand. She believed that next time, Orphan would have an answer for her. Seeing that Claire was about to wake up, she decided to arrange to meet him next time. She also didn't want to meet Tish at this moment, so she left immediately. Tish and Magic then came down and reunited with Orphan. That night, he was taken back and bandaged, but he had to vomit everything Claire had cooked. She had to hide outside the gate because she didn't want to be punched by Orphan. Azali, at the gate, gave her some advice about making mistakes, all philosophical sentences that I'm sure him don't want to hear, so let's skip that. Meanwhile, at the tower, an assassin had broken in and killed several more people there. Orphan was now packing because he wanted to leave soon, but as soon as he reached the door, he encountered another assassin. The assassin knew who he was. At this moment, Claire and Magic came up, so he prepared a spell to protect both of them, but the assassin had already left. Claire then took out a cake she had just made for Orphan to eat. He absolutely refused to eat, but was still forced to swallow it while talking and could only vomit it out. Tish had to come over and tell them to shut up because she had been working for 2 days without sleep. The next morning, Orphan said he wanted to leave after enrolling Magic in the tower. He had resolved the assassin issue and revealed that Krylan was a puppet, but he said he didn't know who had activated it. Of course, Tish realized he was lying, but he still insisted on not revealing anything about Azali. Tish informed him that she had vouched for his return to the tower, so he could stay without any pressure, but if he remained stubborn, he would have to face assassins from the tower. However, he revealed that what she said had already happened. Meanwhile, Magic was reading the book he had picked up from Childman's house when Claire misunderstood it as reading her diary. He had to remind Claire that her diary was still in her other hand. Orphan came and said he would take Magic to the tower. Claire wanted to go, but Orphan refused, so Tish would have her 2 students take Claire on a tour. While eating and viewing the Tower Fang, all 3 encountered the 2 dwarves again. They were selling Tower Fang-shaped pillows. Claire threatened to tell Orphan, so they sulked and went elsewhere to sell. Tish's student revealed that this tower was originally managed by the upper levels, and below were the classrooms. Childman's class was the most favored and had some influence on the upper levels, which is why they were hated by other classes. Childman's disappearance had thrown the tower's order into chaos at this time. Meanwhile, Orphan was taking Magic to the tower with Tish when Orphan asked if she had made any enemies. She hadn't, so he knew that if they were ambushed now, it would be because of him. Just as he finished speaking, the entire car was attacked. Orphan used Magic to protect the car and even blew away the anesthetic smoke released from some flying bottles. The enemies quickly surrounded them, and Orphan knew this group was from the Dragon Faith. Orphan rushed out alone and dealt with them all. He questioned one of them about the reason for attacking his group, suspecting it was revenge for the group in that forest, but they accused him of massacring their people when he hadn't killed anyone at all. But then someone beheaded this person. That person also revealed himself. He was the one who had killed people in the tower earlier that I saw. He knew Orphan and introduced himself as Hydrant. Tish knew he was from the upper echelons and thought he came to escort them. It seems he was the one Orphan had left for dead before. Orphan then went to the tower's entrance and was called in for a private meeting by Fort's secretary. Fort didn't seem surprised to see Orphan again. He wanted to get straight to the main point about the secretary just now. He was a student of Curlane's class, a rival class to Childman's, and what about this Curlane class? Simply put, the assassin him met last night was from Curlane's class, and so was Hydrant whom him just met. He had sent a report here saying he had found a group of dragon cult followers wandering near the border of this place, so he massacred them and now was exterminating the survivors. The reason Fort only called Orphan in was because he knew Tish would get angry hearing this news, but Orphan was no exception. He went to Curlane's class to find him, and he was already waiting for him there. When he came looking for Hydrant, Curlane informed him that he was no longer a student here. He knew what Hydrant had done but turned a blind eye because his job was just to clean up the dead bodies. Him threatened him not to touch Tish or Magic, or else you'd come after him. Of course, he knew your capabilities, but advised him not to make an enemy of him. because currently Childman wasn't here to control him. Orphan then left, and Tish was still upset because Fort wouldn't meet her, but Magic was happy because she could submit an application to the tower. Meanwhile, Claire had just returned when she encountered the assassin from last night. Orphan returned to find Claire injured and unconscious at the gate. Tish's 2 students informed that it was due to an assassin's attack. Orphan recognized it might be the one he met last night. Orphan wanted to pursue, but Tish stopped him because if he caused more trouble here, the elders wouldn't let it slide. Tish would go look for them. He didn't want her to be in danger, but she thought she wouldn't lose to a coward who only dared to attack a girl and run away. She would protect this home of hers. Orphan then had to take Claire inside for treatment, while Tish had encountered the assassin and realized he was luring her. She didn't want to take risks, but also didn't want to lose track. Orphan later went to find Tish. Claire wanted to follow, so he instructed Magic not to let Claire follow him. He then went alone while Tish had been lured to her old hometown. He led her to a dilapidated house to ambush her with his accomplice. She knew the other one was Hydrant. He had hoped to encounter Orphan here too, but knew he would come sooner or later. Tish didn't think she would lose to them, so she cast fire magic to attack. Orphan noticed the flash of light and quickly ran there. Tish was now overwhelmed by the 2 and had 2 fingers cut off by Hydrant. But just at the difficult moment, Azali came to rescue her. Hydrant was surprised that Azali wasn't dead, so they left. Azali healed Tish and left before Orphan arrived. He took Tish home, and Tish thought he had saved her, even mistaking his voice for Azali's. He knew what had happened, so he just went along with it. He informed that Claire was okay, but although Tish's fingers were reattached, the nerves couldn't be restored, so those 2 fingers were now as good as useless. He wanted to make them pay, but Tish wanted him to stop doing foolish things. She'd rather lose 2 fingers than lose him. She wanted Orphan to report to Fort. Fort would know to report back to the upper echelons to thoroughly deal with Curlane's group. She thought if Comican were still alive, he could heal her hand. It's just that after Comican passed away, almost everyone left, and only she and Fort remained at the tower. Therefore, she wanted Orphan not to leave her here alone anymore. Orphan later met Azali in the yard, so he went to talk to her. She informed that Curlane had begun the final stage of his plan. They had dealt with some opposing elders, and conversely, she had to deal with some elders on Curlane's side. She told Orphan that Curlane was trying to gain control of the tower, and what they wanted was the map of the Brown family. 1,000 years ago, one of the gods of the world tried to kill the other gods to become a unified entity, thus becoming the King of Magic. The church viewed the King of Magic as heretical, but few knew that the King of Magic had secretly left behind a book. This book was a map leading to power, and it was gradually passed down to the Brown family. However, it soon disappeared from that family and was obtained by dragon cult followers. The last person believed to be holding this book was Childman. I see something familiar here. He must have realized to some extent that this is related to the book Magic picked up at Childman's house, right? Azali knew that book would attract Curlane's group here, but they also needed that book, so Azali decided not to let them have it. And she knew Curlane's group would act tonight. She would deal with the assassins and leave he with the task of assassinating Curlane. He knew he had no choice but to follow Azali's plan. As for where the book was, she informed he that Magic was keeping it. Azali then gave he the power to move between spaces and left. He were quite annoyed that Azali could manipulate he so easily. When he went inside, he learned that Claire had heard everything. He asked Magic where she got the book and immediately realized that Azali had deliberately arranged for Magic to find it. He then asked both of them to come with he because he knew he needed both their help. He said directly that they would go to the tower and beat those who did this to Tish. Orphan and the 2 younger ones then arrived outside the tower. Claire understood the general plan, while Magic felt a bit guilty for taking the book, which led to Tish getting hurt. But Orphan thought Magic wasn't at fault because sooner or later, he would have to finish everything with Curlane's class. And now the way for them to enter was to climb over that wall, and when physical means couldn't solve it, mages would do what they do best. As they entered, Orphan explained that he chose to attack first this time because it would be hard for them to anticipate. They usually sneak out at midnight when the guards go to rest, but he was sure they wouldn't come out today because they had guessed he would come here, but not the two younger ones. For now, he wanted to overcome his weakness and prove he was truly the heir. He then went to the guard room to check and found the guards had disappeared. Hydrant attacked him from behind, forcing him to retreat. He had to counterattack, and Hydrant called for his accomplices, forcing Claire to summon her wolf to block the attack. Orphan saw that he didn't care about being discovered by other guards, and Hydrant said that was Curlane's problem. He didn't care about Curlane's fate, but just wanted to settle things with Orphan once and for all. He knew he was the one who hurt Tish, and he knew he had concealed the fact that Azali was still alive. Orphan then jumped back and lured Hydrant to a suitable place to fight, an old training room where he and Childman's entire class used to practice together. He was still bitter about this scar, the scar he gave him 5 years ago. At that time, he had intended to apply to the court to work, but he came to bring he back because the elders needed at least one person at the tower capable of dealing with Azali, and the person they needed was Orphan, the one to whom Childman had passed on all his techniques. But he refused and shot him in the face. Both still haunted by each other, they would settle all grudges here. Orphan used magic to lift him up to shoot a light arrow, but he managed to counterattack and rush in. Orphan teleported behind him, bringing both back to hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, Claire encountered another one. This one noticed that Orphan's group had been separated. He decided to deal with Claire before looking for magic. She heard him thinking she was useless and got angry. Just as he realized Claire's abilities, her wolf cut off his hand. Magic woke up in a strange place and encountered Hydrant's accomplice. He wanted to deal with Magic, but the boy ran away. However, the book fell and was taken by him. Magic had no choice but to stay and fight. He raised a shield to block spells, and then figured out how to use light arrows. Although he managed to shoot, he missed, so the other guy shot back. Magic somehow learned to teleport and dodged, but those powerful moves had depleted his magic, so Fort stepped in to drive the other guy away. Magic wanted to go reclaim the book, but Fort wanted to let Orphan handle it himself, and from now on, Magic would be his student. Meanwhile, Orphan had used his superior physical skills and techniques to defeat Hydrant. Just as he was about to burn the other half of his face, Claire arrived. She said she had just punched an assassin and was brought here by the wolf. Orphan was glad he had brought her along. He then went with her to Curlane's class. Curlane had obtained the book and confessed all his crimes, so Orphan told him to look carefully, because it was Claire's diary that he had slightly modified to look like the real book. Fort then came in and charged Curlane's entire class, but Curlane thought Fort didn't have enough authority, so Orphan showed him the indictment already signed by Hydrant. Hydrant had intended to betray him from the start because his goal was simply revenge. Azali then arrived. Orphan realized Fort had known Azali was alive before. Curlane rushed to take Azali's life, but was struck down by Orphan using the ultimate technique taught by Childman. However, Azali told him there was no need to finish off someone like Curlane. She then cast a spell to make all of Curlane's students forget she was still alive. They were then all arrested. Fort didn't expect Childman to be dead, but he would try to control this place as Childman once did. Azali had the real book with her and revealed that it contained the secret to preventing the world from reaching destruction. She would investigate it herself, and if Orphan wanted to find her, he should go to the church. Thus, Azali continued her journey towards her own goals, and Orphan would continue his journey to uncover the mystery of Azali's objective. This concludes part 1 of the film.